Have you ever watched someone else get rich off a system you helped build and only realized it years later when it was too late to do anything about it? I'm not talking about stocks. I'm not talking about some pyramid scheme you got talked into at a hotel conference room. I'm talking about something so woven into the daily fabric of how you spend money, where you park your attention, and what you believe is even possible, that most men never stop long enough to see it for what it actually is. I want to tell you something that happened to me about 8 years ago. I was sitting at my kitchen table at around 11 at night, and I had just spent about 40 minutes comparing prices on a platform I will not name, trying to decide between two products that differed by $3. And in that moment, something clicked. Not the buy button, something else. I realized that I was not a customer. I was a unit of behavior being harvested. The time I spent, the data I generated, the patterns I revealed, all of it was feeding a system I had never agreed to participate in, but had been participating in every single day. That night, I started asking questions I should have been asking a decade earlier. Questions not about which products to buy, but about who actually profits from the architecture of how buying happens at all. What I discovered over the following years changed something fundamental in how I see money, systems, and power. Not what I spend, how I think. And that distinction matters more than anything I could ever tell you to go buy or invest in. If you stay with me through this conversation, I am going to show you the skeleton underneath the machine that Jeff Bezos built. Not to make you angry, to make you dangerous. Because Leonardo da Vinci once said that the man who understands a system owns it. Everyone else is merely operated by it. Here is the counterintuitive thing I need to say right up front, and I know it is going to sound wrong at first. Jeff Bezos did not build a retail company. He built a taxation system. And unlike the government kind, you pay into this one voluntarily, enthusiastically, and usually while feeling like you got a deal. I know how that sounds. Stick with me. Every time you buy something on that platform, you are not just purchasing a product. You are subsidizing a data collection engine, a logistics monopoly, a cloud computing empire, and a behavioral psychology experiment, all at the same time. The product is almost incidental. What you are actually paying for is your own continued participation in a system that profits from your presence, regardless of whether you buy anything at all. That is not retail. That is infrastructure tax dressed in 2-day shipping. I first started piecing this together not from a business school lecture, but from reading Brad Stone's book, The Everything Store. Most people read that book and come away thinking, what an inspiring entrepreneurial journey. I read it and thought, this man figured out how to make the entire global economy pay rent to him. Da Vinci warned that the greatest chains are the ones the prisoner has convinced himself are freedom. That line never made more sense to me than the day I truly understood what Amazon Prime is. It is not a membership. It is a behavioral modification program that you paid to join. And the results speak for themselves. Let me give you a metaphor that will make this concrete. Imagine you own the road, not a business on the road itself. Every car that drives on it is your customer, whether they know it or not. Every store that opens along it pays you. Every delivery truck that uses it funds you. Every new house built beside it raises your value. You do not need to sell anything. You just need everyone to keep driving. That is Amazon Web Services. That is the marketplace infrastructure. That is what Bezos actually built underneath what looked like a bookstore. Now here is the question I want you to sit with for a moment. Are you a person who owns a road in some form, even a small one? Or are you someone who has been driving on other people's roads your entire financial life, wondering why the destination never quite arrives? That distinction, that single line between owning infrastructure and renting access to someone else's, is what separates the way wealth actually accumulates from the story most of us were told about how it works. If that question landed somewhere uncomfortable, I want you to drop 1 or 2 words in the comments right now that capture what just moved through you. Just 2 words. honest reaction, nothing polished. Because the people who comment on videos like this are not passive watchers. They are men actively working through something. And if you want more conversations at this level, subscribe right now. Not because this is a great channel, but because this is a room full of men who refuse to be operated by systems they do not understand. That is the only kind of people I want in this conversation. Let me take you back to that kitchen table for a moment, because what I described earlier did not just make me think differently about Amazon. It started pulling on a thread that eventually unraveled most of what I believed about financial independence. I had been told, like most men in their 30s, that the path to freedom was simple. Work hard, save aggressively, maybe invest in some index funds, and eventually the math would work out. And that advice is not wrong exactly. It is just radically incomplete. It is advice that assumes the game is fair, the rules are stable, and the house does not have structural advantages built directly into the architecture of how the money moves. Da Vinci observed that the greatest obstacle to discovery is not ignorance, it is the illusion of knowledge. And that illusion, that comfortable, functional illusion, that you understand how money works because you have been managing yours for 20 years, is precisely why most intelligent men never build the kind of wealth or freedom they actually want. They are not lazy. They are not stupid. They are playing a game whose rules were written by the people who benefit most from their not questioning them. The reason most people resist this idea is not because it is too complex. It is because accepting it requires admitting that a significant portion of your financial behavior has been shaped by someone else's design, not your own independent thinking. That is a hard thing for a man who values autonomy to sit with. A second thinker I will not name here, but whose work on systems and power I would encourage you to find, described this as the invisible architecture of manufactured consent. You did not choose to trust convenience. You were engineered to. Look at what Bezos actually built across cross-domain parallels, and the picture becomes sharper. He built a marketplace where sellers pay to compete, and he profits from every transaction, whether his own products win or not. Then he built cloud infrastructure that his competitors rent to run their own businesses against him. Then he built a subscription product that trains customers to stop comparing prices. Then he built hardware that sits in your home and listens while generating data he owns. Each of these is a road. Each one extracts value from every car that drives on it. And this is not unique to Amazon. This is the structure of almost every durable, generational wealth system ever built. The people who built those structures did not get rich by being better workers. Vinci understood this centuries before the first server farm existed, when he wrote that force is born of constraint. The man who designs the constraint controls the force it produces. Now, I want to shift the register here because I can already feel some of you starting to build your objections. And I want to name them before you do, because that is how you know whether someone actually understands the territory they are discussing or is just performing expertise. You are probably thinking one of three things right now. First, this is interesting, but it does not apply to me because I am not trying to build the next Amazon. Second, this feels vaguely conspiratorial, like I am about to tell you to buy gold and move to a compound in Montana. Third, and this is the one that stings the most, maybe you are thinking I am already too far behind to change the fundamental structure of how I generate and keep money. I hear all three. The first objection is a form of learned smallness that Da Vinci specifically warned against when he noted that men limit their ambition to the size of the room they currently inhabit, rather than the size of the horizon they can actually see. The second objection is a defense mechanism. Calling something conspiratorial is a way of dismissing it without having to engage with it. And the third one is the quietest and most dangerous, because it sounds like realism, but it functions like surrender. Here is the open loop I want to leave you with. Bezos stepped away from Amazon in 2021, not because he was done, because the machine was finished and he was ready for the next architecture. He said publicly that Earth is a place you can visit, implying the actual work is happening somewhere else. Men who understand systems at that level do not retire. They redirect. And that raises a question that I do not have a clean answer to, but that I think about more than almost anything else. What would you build if you stopped renting space on someone else's infrastructure and started designing your own? Not the product, the road. Not the store, the system underneath the store that makes the store inevitable. That question does not have an answer that fits in the rest of this video. But if you have been a passenger on someone else's road long enough, you already know it is the right question. Da Vinci once said that a man who never acts on the knowledge he gains is simply a well-informed prisoner. And Vinci was not being poetic, he was being precise. Because there is a specific kind of man who absorbs ideas like this, nods with real recognition, and then goes back to driving on roads that other people own. That man knows the truth. He just has not decided yet whether knowing it is enough. That decision is the only one that actually matters. And I think you already know which way you are leaning.
The question is whether you will act on it before someone else builds the road you were meant to own.
Let me show you the subtle layer most people never notice when they talk about Bezos. The genius was not simply building infrastructure. It was teaching millions of people to prefer it. Convenience is the most powerful behavioral lever ever discovered in commerce because it bypasses ideology, intelligence, and even suspicion. You may dislike a company, you may disagree with its practices, but if it saves you 15 minutes and removes friction from a decision, your brain quietly justifies returning to it again and again. How many times have you chosen the fastest option, even when you knew there might be a better one somewhere else? Over time, that habit becomes loyalty, and loyalty becomes dependency. That is the quiet tax embedded in convenience. Not money, attention. Once a system captures your attention at scale, everything else follows. Data flows, sellers arrive, competitors adapt themselves around the system rather than against it. This is why Amazon did not need to destroy every rival retailer. It simply needed to become the gravitational center around which retail behavior reorganized itself. And once gravity is established, every object begins orbiting, whether it intended to or not. The road metaphor becomes even more accurate here because the most profitable roads are not the ones people are forced to drive on. They are the ones people cannot imagine avoiding. This is where the story becomes more interesting than most people realize. When Bezos launched Amazon in the 1990s, it looked fragile, almost naive. An online bookstore competing with giants like Barnes & Noble sounded less like a revolution and more like a hobby with venture capital. But Bezos was not thinking in terms of bookstores. He was thinking in terms of transaction flow. Here is the part that breaks most people's assumptions. The goal was never to sell products better than everyone else. The goal was to control the environment where selling happens at all. If you control where transactions occur, you slowly begin controlling everything surrounding them. Payments, logistics, advertising, data, and eventually behavior itself. Think about what happens the moment a seller joins the marketplace. They bring their products, their customers, their marketing efforts, and their pricing experiments into Amazon's environment. Every one of those actions generates data Amazon owns. Over time, the platform learns which products convert best, which prices move inventory fastest, which images keep people clicking longer. Sellers are competing with each other, but the platform is learning from all of them simultaneously. That asymmetry is the true advantage. If you were designing a system for learning faster than every competitor, would you build a company or a marketplace? But here is the deeper level that rarely gets discussed outside of quiet rooms where serious investors talk about structure instead of headlines. Infrastructure wealth compounds differently than product wealth. If you sell a product, every dollar requires another sale, more marketing, more production, more friction. But if you own the system through which thousands of other people sell products, every dollar they earn drips a percentage into your reservoir automatically. Have you ever noticed how the largest fortunes rarely belong to the people producing the goods, but to the ones controlling the channels those goods must pass through? This is why the largest fortunes in history almost always come from controlling the channel rather than the item moving through it. Railroads, oil pipelines, payment networks, stock exchanges, data networks. Bezos simply translated that ancient pattern into the digital age. The product catalog was the visible layer. The real power was the invisible one underneath it. A network that became more valuable every time someone else used it. Once that loop begins, growth stops depending on the founder's effort and starts depending on the activity of everyone else inside the system. That is the difference between building a business and building an ecosystem. Businesses compete. Ecosystems absorb competition and turn it into energy that strengthens the system itself. Now here is the uncomfortable realization that tends to arrive when someone truly sees this pattern for the first time. The majority of financial advice focuses on optimization inside systems rather than ownership of them. Earn more, save more, invest more, all useful ideas, but they exist entirely within roads someone else designed. And here is the cognitive interrupt most people resist. Following good financial advice can still keep you permanently dependent on someone else's infrastructure. That does not make the advice wrong. It simply means it operates within a much smaller game than the one Bezos was playing. So the real question becomes uncomfortable but necessary. Are you trying to improve your position inside the system, or are you thinking about designing one? Because the road you build does not have to look like Amazon to matter. It could be a platform, a network, a marketplace, a community, a piece of software, or even a distribution channel that connects people who previously had no efficient way to find each other. The scale can be small and still powerful. What matters is the structure. When people rely on the environment you created in order to interact, transact, or learn, value begins flowing through your architecture instead of around it. Wealth follows the road, always. So when people talk about Jeff Bezos, they often focus on the wrong story. They talk about hustle, late nights, bold vision, the garage mythology that surrounds almost every billionaire founder. Those details make for good headlines, but they miss the real lesson entirely. Bezos did not win because he sold more books than anyone else. He won because he quietly positioned himself underneath the flow of global commerce and let the system do the compounding for him. And here is the question worth sitting with for a moment. If the real leverage comes from owning the system, why do most people spend their entire lives trying to master the product instead? Once you see this pattern, it becomes difficult to unsee it anywhere. Payment networks take a fraction of every transaction. Software platforms take a subscription from every user. Marketplaces take a percentage of every exchange. The most powerful fortunes in the modern economy come from standing where value moves and collecting a small toll as it passes. So ask yourself something honestly. In the systems you participate in every day, where does the road actually exist? Because most people spend their lives trying to become better drivers, faster drivers, smarter drivers. But the rare few start asking a different question entirely. What would it look like if you owned even a small piece of the road? And that's all for today's video. If this video sharpens your awareness, continue with the next video. How Jeff Bezos built the money system everyone pays for. It will take the structure further. Support the channel by liking, sharing, and subscribing if this way of thinking aligns with you. Stay deliberate, stay measured, and craft your presence the way Da Vinci crafted his work, through proportion, not noise.